So Bismillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. So really, thank you very much for joining this introductory course on Islamic economics. We'll inshallah spend the next 6 or 7 weeks exploring the dominant economic system in the world today, which is capitalism, and juxtapose it with the Islamic economic system, which exists only in the realm of theory as of now. So in front of your screen is the game plan for the next 7 weeks. We'll start our course with the worldview of capitalism, and then we'll look at the operational principles and goals of capitalism. And then the next 2 weeks would answer the same questions about the Islamic economic system. We'll have a session on the theory of property and ownership in Islam. And finally, we'll wrap up the course with an in-depth discussion on riba. So I really want to set the context and provide a deeper appreciation of capitalism so we understand the areas where the real issues lie. And then based on that understanding, we can appreciate the Islamic economic system better. So inshallah, without any further ado, let's dive into the first lecture. Today's lecture will define the basic terms and the components of economic systems. We'll then look at the Enlightenment worldview and what factors led to that worldview. And then we'll also look at some of the philosophical foundations of capitalism. So starting with some of the terms and concepts, first of all, what is economics? Economics is the study of production, distribution, and consumption of goods. And what is an economic systems? So in a society where humans live, humans have needs that have to be fulfilled. And also those needs have to be fulfilled using the resources, and the resources are limited. So what the economic systems are trying to do is fulfill the needs of the people using the limited resources. An economic system is a structured framework that aims to utilize the limited resources to meet the needs of the people. And economic systems consist of a worldview, goals, and strategies. Each economic system defines human needs and the strategies for fulfilling those needs. So really what the economic system is about is about using the limited resources in the society and then producing and distributing to the people so that their needs are fulfilled. Capitalism, as we'll see, has a different understanding of human needs as compared to Islam, and its strategy to meet the needs is also different. Needs in capitalism are unlimited and material, and capitalism relies on the market and the private enterprise for the allocation of the resources. Of course, we're going to look at that in a lot more detail in the coming weeks as well as today. So let's have a look at the terms capital and capitalism. What is capital? Capital refers to anything that can be used in the production. This capital is of various types. The first type is the physical capital, which is the buildings, machinery, raw materials. The second type of capital is the financial capital, which is money in the bank accounts or the cash equivalents. The third component of capital is the human capital. So the physical capital, the financial capital, and the human capital come together to produce goods and services. In economic terms, these are called as land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. So land is the physical capital, human capital is the labor, and the financial capital is the money. And the entrepreneur or the project manager brings together all these capitals for the production of goods and services. And these what are called as the factors of production in economics. What is capitalism? Capitalism is an economic system dedicated to production for profit and to the accumulation of value by private business firms. So there are a few keywords that we need to understand. First of all, in capitalism, profit motive is central. Number two, the private enterprise or ownership of the means of production is with the private firms and individuals. So these are the main areas and keywords in the definition of capitalism. In a lot of books and articles and in the media, we hear about the terms classical economics, neoclassical economics, neoliberal economics. These are all basically synonyms or near synonyms of capitalism. So when you hear about the word classical economics in a book, that is referring to capitalism, and these are basically interchangeable. There are minute differences, but basically the ideas of the free market, free trade, idea of private enterprise, these are common across all these schools of economics, which are called as neoclassical, neoliberal, etc. So let's move on to the economic systems. As we said, economic systems are trying to allocate the goods and services and distribute the goods and services to the people to fulfill their needs. So economic systems must answer three questions, and these questions are related to production, technology, and distribution. So the first question which an economic system tries to answer is which goods have to be produced, what to produce is also referred as what to produce. The second question is how to produce, because the resources, the land, labor, capital, can be brought together in different combinations and permutations. So how do we bring labor and capital together to produce goods and services? In what proportion? And what technology? Does the production have to be labor intensive, or does the production have to be capital intensive? These are the questions which an economic system also answers. The final question, which is important for an economic system, is the question of distribution. Now, you've brought together the factors of production, you've brought together land and labor and raw materials, and you've produced the goods. But how do you allocate the goods? How do you distribute the goods to the people? You need a system for that. And economic system also provides a mechanism to distribute the produced goods and services. And this is common across all economic systems. This is not unique to Islam. Capitalism tries to answer these three questions. Socialism, Marxism also try to answer these questions. And every economic system must answer these questions to fulfill the needs of the people. So now let's look at the components, how these three questions are answered. How is an economic system structured? So every economic system has three components. So the first component is the worldview. Every economic system has a worldview, has a set of assumptions about the big questions of life, about the origin of the universe, about the nature of human life, about the purpose of life. And the way these questions are answered and the way these assumptions are held ultimately determine how the limited resources are used and how they are disposed. Also, they determine the relationship of human beings with each other. So worldview is very central to an economic system. And capitalism has a worldview, Islam has a worldview, Islamic economic system has a worldview, and similarly, socialism also has a worldview. So today's lecture is focused on the worldview, and the goals and strategy will be discussed in the subsequent lectures. So every economic system also has certain goals for the society and for the people. And the way these goals are achieved is through a method or a strategy to achieve the goals. And primarily, there are two strategies which are known as filter mechanisms. So the first is the invisible hand, which refers to the market forces. So you allow the supply and demand to determine the prices and allocation of the resources. So in this invisible hand model, the consumers would demand goods and they are willing to pay a price. Based on the consumer demand, the producers will produce the goods and sell to them at the market price. So in this invisible hand mechanism, there is no central planning, and this takes place through the invisible hand autonomously. The second model is the visible hand. Of course, the visible hand is the hand of the government. So once the goods are produced, how they are distributed. So this question could be answered, or this matter can be also determined by government policies and regulations. So the first one, the invisible hand, is the strategy of capitalism, and the visible hand, or the central planning, is the strategy or the filter mechanism of socialism. So we look at these in more detail, inshallah, and we'll see how Islam has a unique system, which is a combination of the invisible and the visible hand. So with that context and the terminologies, let's move on to the worldview of capitalism. So to discuss the worldview of capitalism, we can start with the Reformation, which can be considered as a turning point in Europe and the beginning of a move away from religious tradition. So this is the beginning of a move away from the religious worldview to an Enlightenment materialist worldview, but it begins with the Reformation. So what happened in the Reformation? So the Catholic Church had become corrupt, and a crisis was caused by moral corruptions of a sequence of popes. They had extremely luxurious lives. They had illegitimate progeny. They were selling pardons for sins to raise money for supporting their lavish lifestyles, etc. So for example, the Pope Alexander VI had acknowledged children, 3 males and 1 female. Alexander VI was himself known as a corrupt pope bent on his family's political and material success. Now recall that popes were not supposed to marry. They advocated a life of celibacy, but their actions were otherwise. They had children, they had relationships with women, and so on and so forth. Alexander VI's son, Caesar, was a murderer and had killed many of his political opponents. And similarly, apart from the Pope, most clergymen also had clandestine sexual relations with women. And once even illegitimate son of a pope was elected as a pope. So we can see that the words and actions of the popes, the Catholic Church, had contradictions. What they preached, they did not practice. And then there was a growing resentment against the corruption of the Catholic Church. So this corruption led to the rise of the Protestants, who attempted to preserve the faith and who wanted to break away from the Catholic Church. Initially, they wanted to reform the church, to fix the church, but eventually what ended happening was the Protestant split from the Catholic Church. Martin Luther, 1483 to 1546, saw himself as a great reformer of the Catholic Church. He was a simple monk who thought the force of his ideas would single-handedly redirect the Leviathan of the church. In the end, however, he divided Christianity into 2 separate churches, and that second division, Protestantism, would divide over the next 4 centuries into a near infinity of separate churches. Luther saw himself as returning Christianity to its roots. He believed that he was setting the clock back. In reality, the ideas of Luther and Protestants changed the world and pushed it kicking and screaming, not into some ideal past, but into the modern era. So this was the beginning. So the Martin Luther and the Protestants protested against the Catholic Church, and they broke away and formed another church. And then the sects multiplied, and the authority of the religious tradition and the authority of the church were undermined. Also, what happened after the Protestant movement is the intolerance of these sects for each other. So there were sectarian wars between the different sects. And between 1560 and 1715, so around for more than 100 years, there were sectarian wars between the Protestants and the Catholics. So the growing division between the Christian churches led to a series of armed conflicts. So Protestants and Catholics shed each other's blood in prodigious amounts in national and civil wars. Similarly, this happened all across Europe. An example from France on August 24, 1572, 3,000 Protestants were executed in a single day in Paris. Similarly, 20,000 Protestants were slaughtered and executed in France in a single day. around the same time. So we can see how the break away from the Catholic Church led to the sectarian wars and the death and massacre in Europe. Also, the third aspect is the conflict between science and scholastic tradition. So as the European philosophers and the Enlightenment thinkers started scientific thinking, it came into conflict with the teachings of the Catholic Church. There was a battle between science and Christianity. The most famous example is that of Galileo, who was forced to recant the heliocentric theory. Similarly, Bruno was burnt at the stake for his views, which were in contradiction to the views of the church, and many other conflicts between the scientists and the church occurred. So the battle was eventually won by science. This also served to discredit religion. So we are seeing the undermining of the religious authority. We are seeing how the Catholic Church is first split, and then wars are being caused in Europe, and how new thinkers, Enlightenment thinkers, are challenging the ideas of the Bible and the Catholic Church, and undermining religion and the religious authority. So the anti-clerical sentiment, the religious wars, and the conflicts between the church and the scientists shook confidence in revealed religion. These events convinced the Europeans that religion could not serve as a basis for ordering a society. And it was thought that a new basis was required to organize the society. And Enlightenment tried to answer this by using reason and scientific inquiry to answer questions of reality about the world, religion, and politics. So the Enlightenment tried to answer the questions which were previously answered by religion, the questions related to metaphysics, the questions related to the reality of nature, about knowledge, about ethics. These questions were historically answered by the scholastic tradition and the church. However, after the undermining of the authority of the church, the Enlightenment thinkers started answering these questions using reason. So I'm just going to have a look at some of the Enlightenment thinkers and how they were trying to address these questions of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. So John Locke, for example, was an empiricist, and he posited that all knowledge comes from sensory experience. So touching is believing, seeing is believing. Now, he suggested that the mind at birth is a tabula rasa, which is a blank slate. And this position challenged the traditional Christian doctrine of original sin. In the Catholic doctrine, man was born with a sin, so there was not a neutral state. However, this idea of John Locke was at odds with the teachings of the church. Similarly, Berkeley also was an empiricist and argued for idealism, and he argued that the material objects exist only as perceptions in the mind. So the objects don't really exist, but they exist because humans are perceiving them. And when humans are not perceiving them or watching them, then God is perceiving them. So the existence of the material world is contingent upon the perceiver. And this is how basically he explained the reality. And this also challenged the traditional views about the nature of reality that posit a material world that exists independently. So we are seeing that a lot of these Enlightenment thinkers are answering questions about reality, about ethics, and so on and so forth, without reference to religion. The religion is not part of the knowledge now. So the theory of knowledge or the epistemology is only based on the human mind. And this is a radical shift from pre-Reformation or pre-modernity, where all these questions were answered based on religion. Similarly, David Hume questioned our ability to know anything with certainty, including the existence of God. He also classified many religious and metaphysical beliefs as sophistry and illusion. So David Hume was was against religion quite explicitly, as we can see. And again, we are seeing that he's questioning religion and God. Similarly, we have Immanuel Kant, who argued that traditional metaphysical arguments for God's existence were flawed, but he tried to rescue religious belief by presenting it as a postulate of practical reason necessary for moral behavior. So he's positing God not because of the arguments, but because of practical reasons, which is, of course, against the teachings of the church, which had a different understanding of the existence of God. So for ethics also, Kant proposed a categorical imperative, and basically it means that you should act in a way that you would want everyone else to act. So Kant is not referring to the Bible or referring to the religious tradition for ethics. So he's thinking out aloud. He's thinking of secular basis, non-religious basis to define ethics. Similarly, we have Voltaire, who advocated for empirical observation and reason as the primary sources of knowledge. Again, very conspicuously, religion or revelation is not part of the sources of knowledge. It's observation and reason. Again, the whole idea of undermining the religion and the religious tradition we see in Voltaire as well. So Enlightenment thinkers sought to find a suitable non-religious basis for morals. Similarly, we have works by Adam Smith and David Hume, who sought to provide a theory of morals without a reference to God or without reference to religion. However, it was very clear that if pursuit of self-interest was allowed in the society, it would destroy it. And Hobbes put it like this: life would be nasty, brutish, and short. So Hobbes advocated for an all-powerful Leviathan state to enforce constraints on selfish behavior and minimize harm. So while the Enlightenment thinkers are realizing that without God and morality, it would be difficult to organize life, but then they are coming up with patchwork solutions. So Hobbes is suggesting that, okay, let people reject God, let people pursue their self-interest, but we will avoid bloodshed, we will avoid conflicts by having a Leviathan, a very strong state, so that people don't engage in violence or conflicts. So similarly, we have Locke and Rousseau again trying to answer how life and economy could be organized based on self-interest, but without recourse and reference to religion. Of course, the idea here is not to do a course on European Enlightenment or the history of Western philosophy, but this is just to give an idea of the context in which capitalism is born, the context of anti-religiosity, the context of undermining the authority of the church. And we are seeing this, that these philosophers are trying to define ethics based on reason. They are trying to understand reality. They are trying to do metaphysics without religion and God. And that's basically which is developing the Enlightenment worldview. Similarly, we have Darwin around the same time. He answered the question of the origins of man based on chance and without bringing God into equation. So evolution was a necessary ingredient of the Enlightenment worldview, since it provided an explanation for the creation of man without invoking a creator. So the same idea, even the creation of man is no longer divine. It's through a process of evolution. And again, we see the Enlightenment thinkers' animosity and antagonism against God and religion. So next, we discuss the mechanical concept of the universe. So Voltaire was instrumental in promoting the acceptance of the Newtonian worldview. And Voltaire was a deist, which means that God exists, but he does not actively manage or intervene in the world. So he was a staunch critic of organized religion and dogmatic beliefs. And the Enlightenment repudiation of religious ideas engendered in the social sciences the attempt to explain individual and social behavior by analogy with the principles of Newtonian physics. So the idea was, just as the universe is governed by the laws of nature, economics also must have laws which are universal and which can be applied to all societies. So this effort to explain the functions of human beings in mechanical terms tended to make the social sciences materialist and determinist. So the worldview of capitalism was greatly influenced by the Enlightenment movement, as we saw, stretching from the 17th to the 19th centuries. The Enlightenment was a repudiation and antithesis of much of Christian belief. The Enlightenment, initially spearheaded by a handful of intellectuals, later on permeated subsequent generations. Over time, a significant portion of the intellectual elite, and then even a substantial segment of the population, became ingrained with Enlightenment ideals. Schumacher noted that these 19th century ideas are firmly lodged in the minds of practically everybody in the Western world today, whether educated or uneducated. So while these ideas started with the philosophers, we see that they trickled down and permeated the whole Western society. And then, of course, with colonialism, this worldview was exported to other parts of the world as well. And this worldview did not only affect the educated people, but even the uneducated, because the institutions and the systems really permeated and trickled down the ideas amongst the masses. So Crane Binton stated that Westerners, especially Americans, are still spiritual children of the Enlightenment. So we are seeing how deeply rooted the ideas of Enlightenment are, such that the philosophers and thinkers are admitting that the Christian world and the Western world are no longer following the religious paradigm or the religious worldview. Rather, they have embraced the Enlightenment worldview. So this encapsulates the enduring impact of the Enlightenment on Western societies, framing contemporary Western thought as a direct descendant of Enlightenment ideals. These observations demonstrate the deep-rooted and extensive influence of the Enlightenment on modern Western thought and societal norms. So what are the ramifications of Enlightenment? Religion no longer enjoyed an unchallenged acceptance as a basis of organizing the society, and self-interest, prices, and profits replaced religion as the primary criteria for allocating and distributing resources. Another ramification was the birth of materialism. So once God and religion are out of the picture, materialism is born. It holds that matter is the fundamental constituent of the universe. All phenomena can be explained by material entities or processes. Accordingly, wealth, bodily satisfaction, and sensuous pleasures were either the only or the greatest values one could seek to attain. Materialism thus provided the foundation for the commercial consumerist culture, which has gone from strength to strength over the years. Another fundamental idea which emerged from the Enlightenment is the idea of utilitarianism. And basically, as we'll see next week, this is the basis of classical economics, and this is the basis of capitalism. The whole of consumer theory is based on the idea of utility and utility maximization. And this idea is coming from Jeremy Bentham, who was an atheist, and he proposed that utilitarianism must take the place of moral values. What gives pleasure is good, and what causes pain is bad. So good and bad is being defined in terms of pleasure and pain. So a good man was accordingly one who strove to maximize his utility, and the good society was one that sought to maximize the sum total of all utility. So we'll see next week that this idea of Jeremy Bentham was taken by Adam Smith, and basically the whole theory of capitalism was founded and predicated on utilitarianism and the maximization of the utility of the consumers. And Bentham said that the pursuit of every individual of his pleasure would lead to the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Utilitarianism has nevertheless had a dominating influence on Western philosophy over the last 2 centuries, thus exercising a significant sway over the Western way of life and through the West on the rest of the world. Utilitarianism tended to strip moral values of their absolute character and made the values relative and subjective, dependent on the usefulness and benefit for the individuals. So just to remind, utility means satisfaction or pleasure. So when Bentham is talking about utility, and when we talk about utility in economics, we're talking about satisfaction and pleasure, which is derived from consumption of goods and services. So utilitarianism, reinforced by materialism, provided the logical rationale for the pursuit of wealth and bodily pleasures. When there is no higher purpose and when God and religion are irrelevant, so what do? We maximize our pleasures. And how do we do that? We need wealth to maximize our pleasures, to buy goods and services. So we pursue wealth, and that becomes the purpose of life. And we use that wealth to purchase goods and satisfy our bodily pleasures. So this is the repercussions and the ramifications of the Enlightenment worldview. So utilitarianism projected consumption as the highest purpose of economic life, the supreme source of happiness, and the ultimate justification of all human effort. It identified the maximizing of earnings and want satisfaction with supreme virtue. Everything done by the individual towards this end was justified. It would serve his self-interest and ultimately the interest of all. So this is the context. So let me recap what we've studied today. We've looked at the worldview, and what is a worldview. If we were to summarize it, we could say worldview is a combination of metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. Metaphysics is the nature of reality, what exists, and questions about God would fall under the metaphysics. Epistemology is knowledge, and we saw how the Enlightenment thinkers defined knowledge as coming from reason and science and from observations. And the epistemology of the Enlightenment consciously removed revelation and religion from the epistemology, such that only the human mind and reason became the sources of knowledge. And also the final component of the worldview is ethics. Ethics is how we define good and bad. And we saw how Kant and Jeremy Bentham defined ethics based on human mind, based on utility and pleasures, without any reference to religion. So this is the sad reality and the sad Enlightenment worldview, which removes God and religion from the metaphysics, removes God and religion from epistemology, and as well as the ethics. So what is left is the human mind and basically the life of this world of 70, 80 years, in which you are basically trying to maximize your utility, maximizing your pleasures, and capitalism is born in this context. And it would really help you achieve those ideals of utility maximization. It would define and organize the society based on those ideals of utility maximization. So a conscious rejection and marginalization of God and religion defines the Enlightenment worldview. The philosophers of the Enlightenment sought to understand the world and, without reference to religion, answered questions related to reality and existence, knowledge, and ethics. So in this intellectual and historical backdrop, Adam Smith in 1776 puts forth his highly influential ideas of organizing the economic affairs of the society based on self-interest and market mechanism. So you see the idea of self-interest is coming directly from the Enlightenment worldview, and the filter mechanism to achieve those self-interest is the market mechanism. So, and those fundamental ideas of Adam Smith are still enormously influential, and everything written about economics since then can be considered a footnote to Adam Smith's ideas. We will explore those ideas next week, inshallah. Thank you very much for your attentive listening, and I thank you once again for your participation, everybody. And I hope to see you, inshallah, next week for a really deep understanding of capitalism and how it works, the principles, the market mechanism, how goods are produced in capitalism, and how the goods are distributed. So you will have a very good understanding and a deep appreciation of capitalism, inshallah, next week. So looking forward to see you next week. Thank you very much for your participation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.